Which data points matter the most for fantasy football running back production and also have stability year over year? Those are two questions that I have spent the last week studying in order to be able to evaluate this year's free agency crop of backs, which includes marquee names like Derrick Henry, Austin Ekeler, and Josh Jacobs. And the findings might be a bit surprising. In fact, I have these guys ranked differently than how they're going in early fantasy drafts today. Now, before we dive into the rankings, which we're going to get to very shortly, I wanted to share with you 4 key insights that I was able to glean by studying this last 13 years of data when it comes to running backs. Honestly, I think this could be the most important part of this video because you can use this for any of your running back analysis, not just for the free agents. Number 1. The stats that matter the most and have the most staying power year over year for fantasy football production at the running back position, they're things you've heard of before. We don't have to get overcomplicated here. It's rushing attempts per game or rush share, routes per game or route participation, and targets per game or target share. That's it. Those are the 3 things we've got to focus on the most. Number 2, changing teams matters. Those same data points we just talked about, they're still the most sticky year over year, but the signal lessens for running backs changing teams versus running backs that were on the same team, especially when it comes to route participation and earning targets. So sometimes staying at the team they're currently at is the best situation for a running back. Number 3, age matters, but let's not get carried away. The running backs that do manage to hang around don't score that many points less than their younger counterparts. That means we can get value from older running backs if they get pushed down the draft board. Now, age does matter in 2 very specific ways, which is why you want to be leery about spending early picks on running backs in drafts. Number 1, they lose access to ceiling outcomes. Since 2011, we've only seen 1 running back at the age 29 or older score 20 plus fantasy points per game. That was Fred Jackson. The other thing that goes hand in hand with that is as running backs age at 29 or older, it's less typical for them to be able to get the larger snap shares we need to help support the volume that scores the big fantasy points. Number 4, we are probably overrating the value of efficiency stats. When you go back and you just look at the data, they're not strong year over year, and they don't have a strong correlation to scoring fantasy points. They're nowhere near the other things that I just talked to you about. Now, having said that, we can't dismiss them because if you look back at the best running back performances that we've seen over the last 13 years, those running backs definitely had efficiency on their side. They broke a lot of runs typically those years, but what I will tell you is even once you normalize for the number of carries per game and you break these running backs down into smaller bands, those things still weren't the number 1 driving factor outside of rushing attempts. It all went back to how those backs were used in the receiving game. They were getting routes and they were getting targets. So efficiency, it's good for a tiebreaker. There's still things we want to think about, but let's make sure that we don't overrate them when we think about how we evaluate these players. So let's talk about my number 1 ranked free agent running back, and that is Saquon Barkley. Not a big surprise. That's where most analysts are going to have Saquon. Only 27 years old, still well within his prime range for carrying a large workload. Not that great in the efficiency department recently. Since his ACL issue, we haven't seen many big seasons as far as yards after contact and things like that. But the explosive run rate's still right there. And remember, those metrics don't matter as much as we think. The big thing here with Saquon is we've seen multiple coaching staffs willing to let him be the bell cow on the ground as well as staying very involved on passing downs. That route participation last season was well above a running back 1 threshold, and his 19% targets per route run, which when you put targets per route run together with route participation, you get target share. But that targets per route run is still right there, almost at that running back 1 level. So we have a guy that can operate in all phases of the game. And if he lands in the right spot, a better offense than what we've seen with the Giants, I think we could see him more of like a mid-range running back 1. If he stays with the Giants, we obviously know what we're getting, and I think that's still a positive. And I think he would look like a mid-range running back 2. So let's talk about my number 2 running back, and that is Josh Jacobs. Only 26 years old. Seems like the former first rounder would be older than that, but still a very young player. And he has shown an ability to carry the workload. The Last couple of years, very good. This past year, 79% of the team's rushing attempts. That's well above the running back one threshold. Remember, that is still, even though we lose some of our signal, that is the most important data point as far as projecting what a player is going to look like the next year at the running back position. Now, it was a down year in efficiency, but let's remember, efficiency can be a fickle beast, and there's no better example than Josh Jacobs. 2 seasons ago, drafters, including myself, completely faded Josh Jacobs. He was falling into round 7 and 8 of drafts because people worried about his efficiency. Oh my God, gonna get taken over by Zamir White. What happened? He came out and dominated. He was the running back 3 in fantasy that year. The next year, what happens? Efficiency drops off again. So I'm not going to sit here and say Josh Jacobs is ever going to be a top 3 running back again. I think the efficiency issues here could matter enough to keep him out of that. But could he still be a running back 1? I totally think that is within the cards. And if he stays with the Raiders, we know they want to run the ball. Antonio Pierce has already talked about how much they like him, and he's involved in the pass game. 52% route participation. That's above a running back 1 threshold. 22% targets per route run last season. Now, I think those numbers come down if Jacobs leaves the team and lands in the wrong spot. I don't think he's a premier receiver, but I think he is a guy you can use in the check down game if you don't have a loaded passing core with a lot of good wide receivers or have a running back like a James Cook that is going to steal the passing downs. Hey, hoops enthusiasts, it's that time of year. The NBA season is in full swing. From buzzer beaters to jaw-dropping dunks, the season is on fire. We've partnered up with DraftKings to get you right in on the action. Discover the excitement of real-time betting by downloading the DraftKings app now. New customers can earn up to $2,500 in your first 72 hours. Deposit a minimum of $500 and earn a $500 bonus bet for every $1,000 bet on DraftKings Sportsbook. Bets must settle within 72 hours of opting in. Sign up using our promo code DEBRIEF, DEBRIEF. The crown is yours. All right, now let's get a little bit different. For my running back number 3, I've got Tony Pollard. That's going to be higher than what you're going to hear from most other sources, but I'm okay with that. He's only 27 years old, still within his prime. Last year, in his first opportunity to operate in a backfield where he didn't have as much competition, he did take over a near running back 1 workload for the Cowboys. Now, I understand some of you are going to say, but look how much his efficiency dropped. My problem with that is efficiency is a fickle beast. I don't know if that was just due to variance. Was it due to the tightrope surgery maybe he wasn't fully recovered from? I think there's a much better chance than we realize for Pollard to have a bounce back efficiency season, and he could be the explosive player we just saw 2 years ago. I don't think we can completely rule that out. And the bigger factor is, over the last 3 seasons, his average targets per route run, 22%. I know it was a little bit of a down year last year at 16%, but the route participation was still there, and that's even more important than your targets based on the research that I've done. So really, Pollard's one of these guys that checks all of the boxes, and I think people could be getting overconfident in the fact that he's washed and that he no longer has that explosive playmaking ability. And for my number 4 running back, I'm going to continue to go against consensus, and it's DeAndre Swift. He's 27 years old. A lot of the same things I like about Pollard. Not quite as strong, but this is still a potential dual threat profile. And I would actually like to see DeAndre Swift leave the Eagles. You have Jalen Hurts stealing all the rushing touchdowns. Jalen Hurts willing to scramble. You've got superstars in A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert earning targets. That can make it hard on any running back to earn targets. So the targets per route run came down last season, but historically, Swift is still at a 25% average for his career. So I'm still going to lean into that career average. I think he's a guy that can still be a 55, 60% route participation player if he doesn't land on another team with a passing down specialist. That's what happened to him last year. Lands where the Eagles want to use Kenneth Gainwell in that 2-minute offense. So if Swift can land on a team where he can have that dual threat role fully unlocked and still be able to score touchdowns, I still think that there's upside here with this player. So that brings us to Derrick Henry, my number 5 running back. I think Henry can still play. He's not what he once was, but I think he still has value. I won't be surprised if he's the number 1 running back signed in this class. I could see an NFL team really falling in love with what he brings them, and none of these guys are going to get huge contracts. They're going to be 1 or 2 year deals, so there's not a lot of risk here in my opinion with Henry. From a standpoint of fantasy though, At the age of 30, my biggest concern is that those ceiling outcomes are gone. Everybody we've talked about up to this point, I could still paint that scenario where we can get to that ceiling outcome. Having said that, remember, once running backs make it to this stage in their career, as long as they can stay healthy and get on the field, we can actually see them keep up with a lot of their younger counterparts. So once you take the ceiling component out, I think that Derrick Henry could still provide value. I don't think a team that's coming to get him is going to be looking for him to be used on the passing downs. So the key is landing on an offense where he gets all of the early down work. It would be a bit of a death blow to Henry if he lands on another team that's also got another running back that's going to share those early downs. And that brings us to the final name today, and it was the one that I struggled with the most. I was not quite sure where to slot Austin Ekeler. On the positive side, we've seen him still near a running back 1 threshold from that attempt standpoint, really that running back 2 level, which is okay. And then we've seen him as far as working in the receiving game, the routes and the targets, still running back 1 levels. And he could have more to give than what we saw last year. He was dealing with a high ankle sprain. So we had a dramatic drop off in his efficiency. And while I don't want to overrate that, I did use it as a tiebreaker when comparing him to a guy like Tony Pollard, because also with Ekeler, he's at 29 years old. So Pollard's 27, has a similar receiving profile. So I went with Pollard higher, but I think you could make an argument that maybe Ekeler deserves to be higher than where I have him on this list, especially in PPR formats. Maybe he's the next Fred Jackson to pop off for 20 plus fantasy points per game over the age of 29. So going to be very interested in the landing spot for Austin Ekeler.